Chapter 6, A Visit to Box 5. We left Monsieur Firmin Richard and Monsieur Ardman Moncharming at the moment when they were deciding to look into the little matter of Box 5, leaving behind them the broad staircase which leads from the lobby outside the manager's office to the stage, and dependencies. They crossed the stage, went out by the subscriber's door, and entered the house through the first little passage on the left. Then they made their way through the front row of stalls and looked at Box 5 on the grand tier. They could not see it well, because it was half in darkness, and because great covers were flung over the red velvet of the ledges of all the boxes. They were almost alone in the huge gloomy house, and a great silence surrounded them. It was the time when most of the stagehands go out for a drink. The staff had left the boards for the moment, leaving a scene half set. A few rays of light, a wan, sinister light that seemed to have been stolen from an expiring luminary, fell through some opening or other upon an old tower that raised its pasteboard battlements on the stage. Everything in this deceptive light adopted a fantastic shape. In the orchestra stalls, the drugget covering them looked like an angry sea, whose glacious waves had been suddenly rendered stationary by a secret order from the storm phantom, who, as everybody knows, is called Ambassador. Messieurs Moncharming and Richard were the shipwrecked mariners amid this motionless turmoil of a calico sea. They made for the left boxes, plowing their way like sailors who leave their ship and try to struggle to the shore. The 8 great polished columns stood up in the dust like so many huge piles, supporting the threatening, crumbling, big-bellied cliffs whose layers were represented by circular parallel waving lines of the balcony of the grand first and second tiers of boxes at the top. Right on the top of the cliff, most of Messieurs Lepenerve's copper ceiling figures grinned and grimaced, laughing and jerking at Messieurs Richard and Moncharming's distress. And yet these figures were usually very serious. Their names were Isis, Aphrodite, Hebe, Pandora, Psyche, Thesis, Pommonia, Daphne, Clytie, Gallia, and Athrusa. Yes, Athrusa herself, and Pandora, whom we all know by her box, looked down upon the 2 new managers of the opera house, who ended by clutching at some piece of wreckage, and from their stared silently at the box 5 on the grand tier. I have said that they were distressed. At least I presume so. Mr. Moncharming, in any case, admits that he was impressed. To quote his own words in his memoirs, "This moonshine about the opera ghost, in which, since we first took our duties of Messieurs Polygamy and Debonin, we had been so nicely steeped. Moncharming's style is not always irreproachable. Had no doubt ended by blinding my imaginative and also my visual faculties. It may be that the exceptional surroundings in which we found ourselves in the midst of an incredible silence impressed us to an unusual extent. It may be that we were the sport of a kind of hallucination brought about by the semi-darkness of the theater and the partial gloom that filled the box 5. At any rate, I saw, and Richard also, saw a shape in the box. Richard said nothing, nor I either, but we spontaneously seized each other's hand. We stood like that for some minutes, without moving, our eyes fixed on the same point, but the figure had disappeared. Then we went out and, in the lobby, communicated our impressions to each other, and talked about the shape. The misfortune was that my shape was not in the least like Richard's. I had seen a thing like a death's head resting on a ledge of the box, whereas Richard saw the shape of an old woman who looked like Madame Gurgey. We soon discovered that we had really been victims of an illusion, whereupon, without further delay, and laughing like madmen, we ran to box 5, and on the grand tier went inside, and found no shape of any kind. Box 5 is just like all the other grand tier boxes. There is nothing to distinguish it from any of the others. Monsieur Moncharming and Monsieur Richards obstinately ostensibly highly amused and laughing at each other, moved the furniture of the box, lifted the cloths and the chairs, and particularly examined the arms in which the man's voice used to sit. But they saw that it was a respectable armchair with no magic about it, although the box was the most ordinary box in the world, and with its red hangings, its chairs, its carpets, and its ledge covered in velvet. After feeling that carpet in the most serious manner possible and discovering nothing more here or anywhere else, they went down to the corresponding box on the pit tier below. In box 5, in the pit tier, which is just inside the first exit from the stalls on the left, they found nothing worth mentioning either. "Those people are making fools of us," Firmin Richard ended by exclaiming. "It will be Faust on Saturday. Let us both see the performance from box 5 on the grand tier." Chapter 7. Faust and What Followed. On Saturday morning, on reaching their office, the joint managers found a letter from the OG worded in these terms. My dear managers, so is it to be war between us? If you still cared for peace, here is my ultimatum. It consists of 4 following conditions. 1. You must give me back my private box, and I wish it to be at my free disposal from henceforthward. 2. The part of Margarita shall be sung this evening by Christine Daae. Never mind about Carlotta, she will be ill. 3. I absolutely insist upon the good and loyal services of Madame Gurley, my boxkeeper, whom you will reinstate in her functions forthwith. 4. Let me know by a letter handed to Madame Gurley, who will see that it reaches me, that you accept, as your predecessors did, the conditions in my memorandum book relating to my monthly allowance. I will inform you later how you are to pay me. If you refuse, you will give Faust tonight in a house with a curse upon it. Take my advice and be warned. OG. Look here, I'm getting sick of him. Sick of him, shouted Richard, bringing his fist down on the office table. Just then, Monsieur, the acting manager, entered. Lachenel would like to see one of you gentlemen, he said. He says that his business is urgent, and he seems quite upset. Who's Lachenel? Asked Richard. He's your sub-groom. What do you mean, my stub-groom? Yes, sir, explained Mercenaire. There are several grooms at the opera house, and Monsieur Lachenel is the head of them. And what does this groom do? He has the chief management of the stable. What stable? Why, your stable, sir, the stable of the opera. Is there a stable at the opera? Upon my word, I didn't know. Where is it? In the cellar, on the rotunda side. It's a very important department. We have 12 horses. 12 horses? And what for, in heaven's name? Why, we want trained horses for the processions in the Juve and Profeta, and so on. Horses used to the boards. It is the groom's business to teach them. Lachenel is very clever at it. He used to manage Franconi's stables. Very well, but what does he want? I don't know. I never saw him in such a state. He can come in. Monsieur Lon Chaney came in, carrying a riding whip with which he struck his right boot in an irritable manner. Good morning, Monsieur Lachenel, said Richard, somewhat impressed. To what do we owe the honor of your visit? Mr. Manager, I have come to ask you to get rid of the whole stable. What? You want to get rid of our horses? I'm not talking about the horses. But the stablemen. How many stablemen have you, Monsieur Lanchenel? 6. 6 stablemen. That's at least too many. These are places. Mercenaire posted, created and forced upon us by the Undersecretary for Fine Arts. They are filled by progenies of the government, and if I may venture to, I don't care, I'll hang on for the government, roared Richard. We don't need more than 4 stablemen for 12 horses. 11, said the head riding master, correcting him. 12, repeated Richard. 11, repeated Lanchenal. Oh, the acting manager told me that you had 12 horses. I did have 12, but I have only 11 since Caesar has stolen. And Monsieur Lanchenal gave himself a great smack on the other boot with his whip. Has Caesar been stolen? Cried the acting manager. Caesar, the white horse in the Profeta. There are not 2 Caesars, said the stud groom dryly. I was 10 years old at Falcone's, and I have seen plenty of horses in my time. Well, there are not 2 Caesars, and he's been stolen. How? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's why I have come to ask you to sack the whole stable. What do you say, What do your stablemen say? All sorts of nonsense. Some of them accuse the suppers. Others pretend that it's the acting manager's doorkeeper. My doorkeeper? I'll answer for him as I would for myself, protested Mercenaire. But after all, Monsieur Lanchenal, cried Richard, you must have some idea. Yes, I have, Monsieur Lanchenal declared. I have an idea, and I'll tell you what it is. There's no doubt about it in my mind. He walked up to the 2 managers and whispered, It's the ghost who did the trick. Richard gave a jump. What? You two? You two? How do you mean? How do you mean, I too? Isn't it natural after what I saw? What did you see? I saw as clearly as I now see you a black shadow riding a white horse. That was as like Caesar as 2 peas. And did you run after them? I did, and I shouted, but they were too fast for me, and disappeared into the darkness of the underground gallery. Monsieur Richard rose. That will do, Monsieur Lanchenal. You can go. We will lodge a complaint against the ghost. And sack my stable? Oh, of course. Good morning. Monsieur Lanchenal bowed and withdrew. Richard foamed at the mouth. Settle that idiot's account at once, please. He is a friend of the government's representatives, Mercenaire ventured to say, and he takes his vermouth at Tony's with Lagrin Scholl and Persuset the lion hunter, added Moncharming. We shall have the whole press against us. He'll tell the story of the ghost, and everyone will be laughing at our expense. We may as well be dead as ridiculous. All right, say no more about it. At that moment, the door opened. That's better. It must have been deserted by its usual Cerberus, for Madame Gurgey entered without ceremony, holding a letter in her hand, and said hurriedly, "I beg your pardon. Excuse me, gentlemen, but I had a letter this morning from the opera ghost. He told me to come to you, that you had something to—" She did not complete the sentence. She saw Firming Richard's face, and it was a terrible sight. He seemed ready to burst. He said nothing. He could not speak, but suddenly he acted. First, his left arm seized upon the quaint person of Madame Gurgey and made her describe so unexpected a semicircle that she uttered a despairing cry. Next, his right foot imprisoned its sole on the black taffeta of her skirt, which certainly had never before undergone a similar outrage in a similar place. The thing happened so quickly that Madame Gurgey, when in the passage, was still quite bewildered, and seemed not to understand. But suddenly she understood. The opera rang with her indignant yells, her violent protests and threats. About the same time, Carlotta, who had a small house of her own in the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, rang for her maid, who brought her letters to her bed. Among them was an ominous missive written in red ink, in a hesitating, clumsy hand, which ran, "If you appear tonight, you must be prepared for a great misfortune. At the moment when you open your mouth to sing, a misfortune worse than death. The letter took away Carlotta's appetite for breakfast. She pushed back her chocolate, sat up in bed, and thought hard. It was not the first letter of the kind which she had received, but she never had one couched in such threatening terms. She thought herself at the time the victim of 1,000 jealous attempts, and went about saying that she had a secret enemy who had sworn to ruin her. She pretended that the wicked plot was being hatched against her, a cabal which would come to a head one of those days. But she added that she was not the woman to be intimidated. The truth is that if there was a cabal, it was led by Carlotta herself against poor Christine, who had no suspicion of it. Carlotta had never forgiven Christine for the triumph which she had achieved when taking her place at a moment's notice. When Carlotta heard the astounding reception bestowed upon her understudy, she was at once cured of an incipient attack of bronchitis and a bad fit of sulking against the management, and lost the slightest inclination to shirk her duties. From that time, she worked with all her might to smother her rival, enlisting the services of influential friends to persuade the managers not to give Christine an opportunity for a fresh triumph. Certain newspapers, which had begun to extol the talents of Christine, now interested themselves only in the fame of Carlotta, lastly in the theater itself.
I need some water. Oh, please.